A millionaire pretends to be homeless and falls for the only girl who helps him. The rain came down in cold, relentless sheets as Logan Caldwell leaned back against the brick wall of a forgotten alley, his duffel bag sagging beside him. He pulled the tattered hood of his oversized sweatshirt tighter around his face, shielding himself from the prying eyes of passers-by. For the first time in years, Logan felt invisible. It was exactly what he had wanted, what he needed. Across the street, a café glowed warm and inviting, its golden light spilling onto the wet pavement. Happy voices and the clink of coffee cups drifted into the night, a stark contrast to the chill that seeped into Logan's bones. He watched a young couple laugh as they shared an umbrella, their world untouched by the kind of loneliness he was only beginning to understand. Logan wasn't actually homeless, though his appearance would have made anyone think otherwise. In truth, he was worth billions, a tech mogul whose name adorned skyscrapers and headlines. But after years of hollow success and shallow relationships, he'd reached a breaking point. He wanted to see if there was any goodness left in a world where people either wanted something from him or feared him. So he had made a choice: shed the tailored suits, the luxury cars, and his carefully managed image, and step into a life no one would envy. The experiment was meant to last a month. 3 weeks in, Logan wasn't sure he was any closer to finding what he was looking for. Most people avoided eye contact. Others whispered or laughed at his disheveled state. And then there were the cruel ones, the ones who shouted insults or crossed the street just to keep their distance. He was ready to give up. The cafe door jingled open, and a young woman stepped out, balancing a tray of neatly wrapped sandwiches. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she wore an apron that said "The Daily Grind" in playful cursive. She paused on the curb, scanning the street as though searching for something or someone. "Hey, you," she called, her voice carrying over the sound of the rain. Logan stiffened, glancing behind him, certain she couldn't be talking to him. "Yes, you," she said, stepping closer. Her sneakers splashed through the puddles as she approached, her tray wobbling precariously. "You look like you could use something to eat." Logan blinked up at her, caught off guard. Her eyes were soft but direct, the kind of gaze that didn't flinch or turn away. He hesitated before nodding. The woman crouched beside him, offering a sandwich. "It's turkey and cheddar." "Hope that's okay." "Why are you doing this?" Logan asked, his voice rough from disuse. She frowned, tilting her head. "Why wouldn't I?" Most people would have said something like, "Because you're homeless," or "Because you look like you need help," but her answer caught him off guard. It wasn't pity or condescension, it was a simple matter of fact. She extended her hand. "I'm Lily." Logan hesitated but took it. "Logan." "Well, Logan, you picked a terrible night to be out here," she said with a wry smile, gesturing to the rain. "There's a shelter 2 blocks down, if you need a place to stay." "I'll be fine," he muttered, though he wasn't sure why he felt the need to reassure her. Lily studied him for a moment, her brow furrowing. "Okay, but if you're still here tomorrow, come by the cafe. I'll make sure you get breakfast." And just like that, she was gone, her tray empty and her footsteps fading into the night. For the first time in weeks, Logan felt something other than bitterness or despair. He didn't know what it was: hope, maybe? Gratitude? Whatever it was, it lingered, warming him against the cold. The next morning, true to her word, Lily found him in the alley with a steaming cup of coffee and a cinnamon roll. She stayed longer this time, sitting cross-legged across from him as they talked. "Your family?" she asked after a while. "Are they around?" Logan hesitated, unsure how much of his real life to reveal. "No, not anymore." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice gentle but not prying. "What about you?" he asked, eager to shift the focus. "Do you have family around?" Lily shrugged. "Not really. My mom passed when I was little. My dad, well, let's just say he's not in the picture. It's just me now." Her words were matter of fact, but Logan caught the faint tremor in her voice. She wasn't looking for sympathy, it was just the truth. Over the following days, their conversations grew longer, the gaps between Logan's carefully constructed lies and Lily's unfiltered honesty widening. She told him about her dream of opening her own bakery someday, how she saved every spare penny from the café job to put toward night classes at the culinary school downtown. "Why do you work so hard?" Logan asked one evening as the sun dipped below the buildings. "Because I have to," she said simply. "If I don't, no one else will." Her resilience amazed him. For years, he had surrounded himself with people who complained about minor inconveniences or crumbled under pressure. But Lily, she carried her struggles with grace and determination. What started as a social experiment had turned into something else entirely. Logan found himself looking forward to her visits. The way her laughter cut through the monotony of the streets. The way she treated him like a person, instead of a problem. And then it hit him. Somewhere between a shared coffee and a story about her childhood, he was falling for her. Logan sat on the edge of the worn bench in the park, his shoulders hunched against the morning chill. The leaves overhead had just started to turn, their vibrant yellows and oranges a stark contrast to the gray skies. He held the cup of coffee Lily had brought him that morning, the warmth of it seeping into his palms. Across from him, a mother and child played catch, their laughter rising and falling like the rhythm of a song he hadn't heard in a long time. He found himself smiling faintly, almost without realizing it. Lily had left hours ago to start her shift at the café, but her presence lingered. She always did, as though her kindness had the power to stretch through time and space. It unsettled him how much he looked forward to her visits, how easily she had cracked the armor he'd spent years perfecting. In the weeks since they'd first met, Lily had become his anchor in ways he hadn't anticipated. She brought him sandwiches, coffee, and the occasional cookie from the café, but it was the way she stayed talking to him like he was an old friend that left the deepest impression. It wasn't pity, it wasn't charity, it was genuine. And Logan couldn't remember the last time someone had treated him with that kind of sincerity. He shifted on the bench, his thoughts circling back to the decision he'd made to step away from his old life. The experiment, as he had called it in the beginning, was supposed to be a lesson in humility, in reconnecting with the world he had distanced himself from. Yet it was becoming something far messier than he had anticipated. The lines between who he was and who he pretended to be were blurring. On paper, he was still Logan Caldwell, billionaire and tech tycoon. But here, in this park, with dirt under his fingernails and a rumpled hoodie as his armor, he wasn't sure who he was anymore or who he wanted to be. The bell above the daily grind chimed softly as Lily wiped her hands on her apron and greeted the next customer with her usual cheerful, "What can I get you today?" She worked her way through the line with practiced ease, her mind half focused on the orders and half on Logan. He'd been quieter than usual that morning, though she'd tried not to push. Something about him intrigued her, not just the quiet intelligence in his eyes or the way he seemed to choose his words so carefully, but the sense that there was a story behind his guarded demeanor. When her shift finally ended, she packed a paper bag with a few pastries that hadn't sold and made her way back to the park where she knew he'd be. He always stayed near the same bench, as if it had become his piece of borrowed territory. She found him there, as expected, staring out at the small pond in the center of the park, lost in thought. "You look like you could use something sweet," she said, holding out the bag as she approached. Logan turned, his face breaking into the slightest smile. "You always know how to find me." "It's not hard when you don't move much," she teased, sitting down beside him. "Besides, you're kind of predictable." He chuckled, the sound low and unfamiliar to his own ears. "Is that a bad thing?" "Not at all," she said, pulling a blueberry muffin from the bag and handing it to him. "Predictability is comforting sometimes." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that didn't need filling. It was Lily who eventually broke it, glancing at him out of the corner of her eye. "Do you ever think about what you'd be doing if things were different?" she asked. Logan hesitated, the question striking closer to home than she could have realized. Different how? Like, if you weren't here, she said, gesturing vaguely to the park. If life had turned out another way. He considered her words carefully, his gaze fixed on the horizon. All the time. Yeah, she prompted, her tone gentle but curious. He took a breath, weighing how much to share. I had a different life before this, he said slowly. And sometimes I wonder if I made the right choices. Lily tilted her head, studying him. What kind of life? Logan met her eyes, something raw flashing in his expression. The kind where you forget why you started in the first place. Her brow furrowed, but she didn't press further. Instead, she offered him a small smile. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're doing okay now. Do you? He asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and disbelief. She nodded. Yeah, you're still here, aren't you? Still trying. Logan didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't used to people seeing him really seeing him, and saying something so simple yet profound. It made him feel exposed in a way that both terrified and exhilarated him. That night, Logan lay awake in the tiny room he'd rented with the cash he had withdrawn before his experiment began. It wasn't much, just a mattress on the floor and a single window that overlooked an alley, but it was enough. He replayed the day's conversation with Lily in his mind, her words echoing louder than they should have. You're still here, aren't you? Still trying. He wasn't sure if it was guilt or gratitude that gnawed at him more. She had no idea who he really was, yet she treated him with a level of care and respect he hadn't earned. It made him want to be better, not the version of himself that had billions in the bank, but the version Lily seemed to believe in. The realization was sobering. The next morning, Logan was waiting for Lily outside the café before she even arrived. She arched an eyebrow at him as she approached, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her jacket against the cold. You're early, she remarked. Trying to take my job or something? I wanted to say thank you, he said simply. For what? For everything, he said, his voice quieter than he intended. For looking at me like I'm not a complete screw-up. She blinked, surprised by his candor. Logan, why would you think I see you that way? He shrugged, his hands shoved into his hoodie pocket. I don't know. I guess I just don't give people a lot of reasons not to. Well, she said, her tone firm but kind, then maybe you should start. Her words hung in the air between them. Unspoken challenges wrapped in casual conversation. Logan nodded, his jaw tightening as though he'd just made a decision. If there was one thing he was sure of, it was that Lily deserved better than the half-truths he'd been feeding her. Better than the man he'd been pretending to be. And maybe, just maybe, he could become someone worthy of the way she looked at him. Someone who didn't just try but succeeded. Logan leaned against the doorframe of his rented room, staring out at the alley below. The faint hum of the city's early morning bustle drifted upward, delivery trucks rattling over potholes, muted conversations of strangers passing by, and the occasional bark of a stray dog. He had spent most of the night awake, turning over every word Lily had said the day before. Her declaration, simple, unassuming, had unearthed something in him. Then maybe you should start. Start what exactly? Living? Believing in something again? Trusting people? The thought felt foreign, too big for him to hold all at once. For so long, his life had been governed by metrics and algorithms, KPIs and quarterly reports. Trust was a commodity sold in boardrooms or traded behind closed doors, not something you gave freely. Not something you felt in your gut. Yet, somehow, Lily had given it to him freely, without asking for anything in return. He sighed and pulled his hood over his head. Grabbing the duffel bag he hadn't touched since the day he'd left his penthouse suite. It was still heavy with the artifacts of his old life, a laptop, a few changes of expensive clothes, and a carefully folded envelope buried at the bottom of the bag. Logan hadn't dared open it yet. It was the final tether to the man he'd been before this, before he'd traded silk for denim and designer loafers for scuffed sneakers. The envelope contained a letter addressed to himself, written on the day he'd decided to walk away. He wasn't sure if he'd ever have the nerve to read it. Lily was stacking chairs onto tables when Logan arrived at the daily grind that afternoon. The café was closed for the lunch rush, a lull in the day when the staff reset for the evening crowd. She glanced up as he walked in, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. He wasn't usually around during this time. "Hey," she greeted, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're early." Logan shifted his weight, suddenly unsure of why he was there. His usual confidence, the kind that had once charmed boardrooms full of investors, seemed to evaporate in her presence. "I wanted to see if you needed help." She quirked an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Help?" "Don't look so surprised," he said, smirking. "I'm capable of more than sitting on a bench, you know." Lily laughed, the sound like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "All right, Mr. Capable. Let's see what you've got." She handed him a damp cloth and pointed toward the tables by the window. Logan nodded, rolling up the sleeves of his hoodie as he got to work. He'd never done anything like this before, wiping down tables, sweeping floors, or stacking chairs, but he found the simplicity of it calming. There was a rhythm to it, a sense of purpose that felt oddly satisfying. It wasn't flashy or complex, it was just honest. As they worked side by side, Lily stole glances at him, her curiosity growing. Logan wasn't like anyone she'd ever met. At first she'd assumed he was just another drifter, someone down on his luck and passing through. But the more time she spent with him, the more she realized he was different. There was a weight to him, a kind of quiet intensity that hinted at a story she hadn't yet uncovered. And then there were the contradictions, the way he carried himself with a confidence that didn't match his appearance, the way he spoke with an eloquence that seemed out of place on the streets. "Okay, I have to ask," she said as they finished stacking the last of the chairs. "Who are you, Logan?" He froze, the question catching him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're not like the other guys I've met out there," she said, her tone gentle but insistent. "You're different. And I can't figure out why." Logan hesitated, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of her gaze, searching for answers he wasn't ready to give. "I'm just a guy trying to figure things out," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. Lily frowned but didn't push further. She could tell there was more to the story, but something about the way he said it made her pause. "All right," she said, letting it go for now. "But if you ever feel like sharing, I'm here." Logan nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Thanks." Over the next few weeks, Logan became a fixture at the daily grind. It started with small tasks, helping Lily carry trays to customers or tidying up during lulls in the day. Before long, he found himself behind the counter, learning how to make lattes and froth milk under Lily's patient guidance. The staff, initially wary of the quiet drifter who had taken an interest in their coworker, eventually warmed to him. He earned their trust through hard work and an unexpected knack for remembering customers' orders. For Logan, it was transformative. He'd spent years surrounded by screens and spreadsheets, his interactions with people filtered through the lens of business. Here, he was learning what it meant to connect on a human level. He learned the names of regular customers and remembered their stories: the older woman who came in every morning with her dog, the college student cramming for exams, the construction worker who always ordered black coffee with 2 sugars. Each interaction chipped away at the walls he'd built around himself. Lily watched the change in him with quiet admiration. She could see the way he softened around the edges, the way his guarded demeanor melted into something warmer, more open. He was still a mystery to her, but she didn't mind. She liked the way he smiled now, the way it reached his eyes. One evening, after the café had closed, they sat outside on the curb, sharing a plate of leftover pastries. The city buzzed around them, its neon lights casting long shadows on the pavement. "Do you ever think about what's next?" Lily asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Logan took a bite of his croissant, chewing thoughtfully. "What do you mean?" "I mean, "This can't be it, right?" she said, gesturing to the cafe behind them. "There's got to be more out there for both of us." He nodded slowly, staring at the horizon. "Yeah, I think about it all the time." Lily tilted her head, studying him. "So what's stopping you?" Logan hesitated, her question cutting deeper than she probably realized. "Fear," I guess he admitted. "Fear of failing. Fear of not being enough." Her expression softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You're already enough, Logan. You just don't see it yet." The word struck him like a lightning bolt, leaving him speechless. For so long he had measured his worth in accolades and achievements, in the size of his bank account and the influence of his name. But Lily didn't see any of that. She saw him. And for the first time in years, he wondered if that might be enough. That night, Logan pulled the envelope from his duffel bag, his hands trembling as he unfolded the letter inside. The words stared back at him, written in his own handwriting but belonging to a version of himself he barely recognized. "If you're reading this, it means you've forgotten who you are. Remember why you started. Remember the things that matter. And if you can, find your way back to them." Tears blurred his vision as he folded the letter and placed it carefully back in the envelope. He didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in a long time he felt like he was on the right path. And he knew, deep down, that Lily was a part of that path. Whether she realized it or not, she was helping him find his way back to the things that mattered, to the person he wanted to be. The evening air was crisp, carrying with it a faint scent of roasted chestnuts drifting from a nearby food cart. Logan stood by the cafe's back door, watching Lily lock up for the night. The sound of the key clicking into place seemed final, like the closing of a chapter. It mirrored the strange kind of restlessness that had been simmering inside him for days now. He shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets, his fingers brushing against the folded envelope he had been carrying since he first wrote it. Lily turned to face him, her breath visible in the cool air. "You walking me home again?" she asked with that teasing lilt in her voice that he had come to anticipate. She always asked, as though it wasn't already an unspoken routine between them. "Yeah," Logan replied, his tone soft but resolute. He fell into step beside her as they made their way toward her apartment, the sound of their footsteps echoing on the mostly quiet streets. The city felt different at night, not quite asleep but quieter, as if it, too, was taking a moment to catch its breath. Logan glanced at Lily as she walked beside him, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, her scarf wrapped snugly around her neck. The faint glow of the streetlights reflected off her hair, and for a moment, Logan forgot himself. Forgot the mess he was in, the lies he had built around his current life, and even the weight of the past he was trying to reconcile. All he saw was her, steady and unshakable in a world that constantly seemed to demand more than it gave. "You've been quiet," Lily said, her voice breaking into his thoughts. She gave him a sidelong glance, her brow furrowing slightly. "Everything okay?" Logan hesitated. He had become good at deflecting, at giving just enough of himself to keep her from asking the questions he wasn't ready to answer. But tonight something about her tone made him pause. "I've just been thinking," he said finally, his voice low. "About what you said the other night." Lily tilted her head. "What part?" "About what's next," he said, his gaze fixed on the sidewalk ahead. "About whether this is it or if there's something more out there." She nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "And have you figured it out?" "Not entirely," he admitted. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about having it all figured out right away." Lily smiled faintly, her breath fogging the air. "I think you're starting to get it," she said, nudging him lightly with her elbow. They walked on in silence for a while, the kind that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Logan found himself glancing at her again, wondering how she had become such an integral part of his life in such a short amount of time. It wasn't just her kindness or the way she seemed to believe in him, despite knowing so little about him. It was the way she made him want to be better, to do better, even when he wasn't sure he deserved it. When they reached her building, She turned to face him, her expression soft but searching. You know you don't have to have it all figured out right now, right? She said. Sometimes it's enough just to take the next step. Logan nodded, though her words settled heavily in his chest. Thanks, Lily, he said quietly. For everything. She smiled, her eyes warm. Anytime, Logan. Get some rest, okay? He watched her disappear into the building before turning back toward the park. He hadn't told her yet, but he had stopped staying in the alley weeks ago. The tiny room he rented was nothing compared to the penthouse he had left behind, but it was enough for now. Still, the park had become a strange kind of sanctuary for him, a place where he could think without the weight of walls pressing in around him. Settling onto the same bench where he had met Lily, Logan pulled the envelope from his pocket. He unfolded the letter, reading it again under the dim light of a nearby lamp. Remember why you started. The words felt heavier now, resonating in a way they hadn't before. He had written them as a reminder, a lifeline to pull himself back from the abyss he had been teetering on. But now, they felt like a challenge, an invitation to step into the person he wanted to become. Logan folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into his pocket. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to start being honest, not just with himself but with Lily. The thought terrified him, but it also felt necessary, like a step he couldn't avoid if he wanted to move forward. The next day, Logan arrived at the café earlier than usual, his nerves jangling like loose wires. He found Lily wiping down the counter, her hair pulled into a loose braid. She looked up as he entered, her face brightening with a smile. You're here early, she said. What's the occasion? I need to talk to you, Logan said, his voice steadier than he felt. Lily raised an eyebrow but set down the cloth she had been using. Okay, what's up? He hesitated, searching for the right words. There's something I haven't told you, he began, his gaze dropping to the floor. Something I should have said a long time ago. Lily's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet concern. All right, she said softly, I'm listening. Logan took a deep breath, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. I'm not who you think I am, he said, forcing himself to meet her gaze. I mean, I am, but I've been pretending to be someone else. I didn't mean to lie to you, but... He stopped, his words faltering under the weight of her steady gaze. Logan, Lily said gently, cutting through his rambling. Just tell me. He swallowed hard. I'm not homeless, he admitted. I've been living in this neighborhood as part of an experiment, I guess you could call it. To see what life is like outside the bubble I've been living in. Because the truth is, he hesitated, the words catching in his throat. I used to be someone important. At least I thought I was. Lily blinked, her expression a mix of confusion and curiosity. What do you mean? I mean, he said, his voice quieter now, I'm Logan Caldwell. The Logan Caldwell. Founder of Caldwell Tech, CEO of a company that's probably on half the devices in this cafe. Her eyes widened, the recognition dawning instantly. Wait, you're that Logan Caldwell. He nodded, his jaw tightening. Yeah, that one. The silence that followed was deafening, stretching out like an ocean between them. Logan braced himself for her reaction, half expecting her to be angry or hurt, maybe even both. But when Lily finally spoke, her voice was calm, though laced with disbelief. Why didn't you tell me, she asked. Because I didn't want you to see me as that guy, he said. The guy with the suits and the skyscrapers and the billion-dollar company. I wanted to know if there was anything left of me that mattered without all of that. Lily stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. You know, Logan, you're a lot of things, but simple isn't one of them. His shoulders sagged with relief at the humor in her tone. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. I should have been honest with you from the start. Yeah, you should have, she agreed, her gaze softening. But I get it. I think deep down you're still trying to figure out who you are. And that's okay. Logan nodded. the weight on his chest easing just slightly. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time he felt like he wasn't walking it alone. Lily had seen him at his lowest, without the trappings of his old life, and she hadn't turned away. That meant more than he could ever put into words. "Thanks, Lily," he said quietly. "For not giving up on me." She smiled, her eyes warm. "Don't make me regret it, Caldwell." And for the first time in years, Logan laughed, really laughed. It felt like the beginning of something new, something real.